It's actually funny because we were doing pretty well. We were doing like 200K USD. So that was actually our second year. So we were actually going pretty well. And then COVID started, but that was probably the only sector that COVID didn't really affect because you really need your trucks to move about, even if your whole country is in lockdown, right? So we were probably kind of immune to that period because everything was kind of in like dependent on movement, truck movement, even if the economy kind of shut down for a bit. So people still needed to buy food. So where's that food going to come from? Trucks are going to deliver them. Well, that's where we come in.
Do you believe in serendipity?
Depends. Kind of depends on the context.
Well, I finished my MBA last year. I took classes all around the world. I was a tour guide in Japan until the pandemic, of course. I wanted to maintain that kind of travel, at least intellectually, if not physically. And so I pursued an MBA that had a global footprint or was part of a global network. And so in my second year classes, I took 10 courses at partner universities. In Hitotsubashi University in Tokyo, one of my classmates was Bangladeshi, and he worked in the prime minister's office at the time. I was thinking about entrepreneurship, global perspectives, collaboration, this and that. And so he and I just kept in touch, talking maybe once a month or so. He got promoted after graduation to become deputy project director of a special economic zone for Japan in Bangladesh. Part of the government's initiative for like economic development this decade was these economic zones. And I didn't know anything about economic zones. And the way he described it was kind of interesting, where it's kind of like a company, if you will, where you're taking, it's like a hybrid, I guess, between a company and an embassy or something, where the government almost like leases this land and they move their companies there in a way to kind of jumpstart the economy. Of course, it's a win-win, ideally. And so I was like, this sounds like entrepreneurship, but on like a national level. And I was like, there's something here. How would you feel about collaborating on a course that basically explains what economic zones are for people like me who didn't know, and then also what Bangladesh is doing? Because I feel like Bangladesh gets overlooked. Like people see India or China or something like that, but Bangladesh is right there. The Bay of Bengal has interesting demographics, like a young population and a lot of potential. And if you look at you probably know this, but if you look at the growth in GDP, I mean, it's up there. And so he's like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. And then he and I have been kind of collaborating on this in our spare time for about a year now on just kind of developing the lesson plan. And now we're at the point where we're just about to flip the switch and start putting it together. But we're going to give 100% of the proceeds to the youth in Bangladesh as like micro seed fund for their entrepreneurial projects, and just kind of like, layer cake it, kind of like, this is what it's like at the nation level, this is what it's like at the grassroots level, and just kind of develop that ecosystem. And I talked to, thought leaders around the world, CEOs, founders, investors, professors, etc. And then I saw you are an entrepreneur from Bangladesh. I was like, this is perfect. So anyway, I thought serendipitous.
Yeah, well, thank you for all of that. That's a little bit overwhelming because not a lot of people know about Bangladesh. And like, as a founder coming from Bangladesh, like who has been in business for the last 10 years, coming up with a product that actually sells overseas is really hard because, like you said, people do tend to overlook Bangladesh for India or China, but they don't really see the potential here. Whereas the demographics here is majority of it is pretty young. So it's always those factors that kind of drive the economy, which is kind of what drove the economy before COVID. We had like 8-9% GDP growth. We had a lot of foreign investments coming in because people were seeing the kind of potential that the demography was offering. And that's how I think Bangladesh came into the scene. And that's where we are right now, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. You gave me a high level of overview, but could you just tell me in your own words, what has your entrepreneurial journey been like so far?
Yeah, so I graduated back in 2012, and I started like as many Bangladeshis would do. We focus on R&D, and that's what I turned to when basically I got the opportunity. So I was looking into exporting R&D goods throughout the world, and I got a breakthrough. So I started a company there, and I've been in trade for like 5 years after I started, and during that time, that's how I actually came across my first problem in running starting my first startup. So basically, like as you know, like shipments are a big hassle. Logistics are a big problem anywhere in the world, especially in a place like Bangladesh, which is pretty much a frontier economy right now, not exactly emerging because we're still getting there, but not quite there yet. So logistics is a pretty big nightmare. So that's where I got this idea that shipments are a big problem in Bangladesh, and a lot of people who are trying to do business overseas, they don't get a lot of proper transparency in shipments. And by shipments, I actually mean trucking. So trucks are a big problem in Bangladesh, and that was my um, first like dip into the startup world because my first startup that I came up with was a trucking marketplace. And trucks in Bangladesh are basically run by brokers and manual paperwork. Excuse me. So that's how people operate on a national scale without any sort of transparency. So we thought, hey, you know what? We should probably take a like take a take a crack at this because people are suffering. People like us, when we had to pay like $50 for one delivery, we had to pay like 3 or 4 times that whenever, whenever trucks were in short supply. So you know what? Maybe we could actually break through with a platform where we can offer customers that journey in a smooth and seamless way with a lot more analytics and less paperwork. That's where we came up with, me and my co-founder came up with Loop Freight. And by the way, my co-founder is actually a graduate from University of British Columbia. He's actually, yeah, exactly. So he's actually done his bit in supply chain. So he came up with a lot of our um, product product management. That's how we actually started the company. We that I'll just say this first because this is back in 2018. 2018 was a time when startups in Bangladesh were not really well known. Like we had like a couple. We had a ride sharing startup. We had Uber that was coming out. They were like just starting and trying to like have a feel for the market. So it wasn't really known. The country wasn't really well known for tech education, and well, rightly so. There wasn't a lot of tech education back then. People didn't really know what startups were. So I mean, getting people to notice what kind of difference we were trying to make was really hard at first. So like what we decided was it's not going to work within Bangladesh. If it's going to work, we're going to have to take this global. So that's when we started applying for accelerators abroad, and we came up with um, Accelerating Asia in Singapore. They're a government-funded accelerator that funds pre-seed startups, and that's how we got our first breakthrough. And basically, they took us in. We incubated for 3 months, got the funding, raised further rounds, did a seed round, raised nearly $1 million, and that's how our journey basically started. And we kind of jump started our company. So that was my first startup, and it's actually funny because we were doing pretty well. We were doing like 200k USD ARR. So that was actually our second year. So we were actually going pretty well. And then COVID started, but that was probably the only sector that COVID didn't really affect because you really need your trucks to move about, even if your whole country is in lockdown, right? So we were probably kind of immune to that COVID period because everything was kind of in like dependent on movement, truck movement, even if the economy kind of shut down for a bit. So people still needed to buy food. So where's that food going to come from? Trucks are going to deliver them. Well, that's where we come in. So yeah, so that's how we pushed through that COVID period. We were kind of moving at a pretty good pace for a country that didn't really know what startups were, and it seemed like we were solving a problem. And then personally, after that, I'm not sure how often this happens in the startup world, but I got an offer to like make an exit. So that was post seed, and I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I should, like it's a good way to like kind of diversify my ventures, maybe do something on my own again. Maybe I should take it. I might never actually get this opportunity. So I took that opportunity, made an exit, and then I started another company that's a salon booking marketplace called Adora. So that's where we are at right now. And well, um, here we are in 2024. It's one life.
Yeah, thank you for that overview. And I want to get into Adora a little bit later. But I'd like to go back to that process of starting in the accelerator. How how did the accelerator experience help you? What are like the high level areas that you saw tremendous value?
First things first, I'll say it straight up. It's the mentorship because I mean, you can get all the funding in the world and you might not make anything with it. You might not actually create any value with it, but it's actually the kind of it's actually the kind of people who are backing you, who are like giving you proper information on how to use that capital. That's what actually made a difference. Because otherwise, I'm pretty sure like we that was our first startup. We were pretty young back then. We actually didn't know how to scale a company on a national level, and that's how. And in a country where startups weren't really that, like I mean, they weren't really that many. So I think I would say the mentorship that they provided a lot of backstory to how logistics works globally, to how to scale, to how to like retain customers, all those kind of information. I would say that's number one. Number two would be the network. I would say they have the kind of people they are pretty connected to the venture capitalists of the region, and they had all the contacts, all the numbers in the little black book, if you will. But I mean that's how they roll, and that's how they connected us, and that's how we raised our funding. So those are probably the two most important things that the program gave us.
You mentioned you raised $1 million in seed funding. Was that a target, or did that define how you had to spend the money afterward? Meaning, did you know your costs at a time and knew that you needed to raise $1 million, or did you just try to raise as much as possible? And once you raised $1 million, it's like, this is how much I have to work with, and then figure it out from there.
We had a target. It was a lot less than 1 million, and then further investors came in later on. So we just packaged it into like one round and call it a seed round. Yeah, I mean, it's always good to know how much you need to raise, and we actually had our budgeting like at least a year prior to raising, but but then like a lot more investor interest came up, and they wanted to jump on the bandwagon, if you will. So we were also kind of wondering whether we will be needing capital down the line because you never know when your runway is gonna be up. That's how Yeah. So that's how we ended up onboarding more investors, and they came in at the same valuation. So we raised.
Okay. I was going to ask, is there a reason not to raise more capital? Was that a conversation that came up? Like, we need to stop at one and not go for two?
Every single day, I would say, every single day. And that was like our mantra, if you will, when we were doing the accelerator program. Where that was like the first thing they told us, that don't raise more than you need, because it's gonna at some point you're going to see that the risk far outweighs the benefits. So that's how we thought that, you know what, we need to double down. We need to make our budgeting tighter, make sure that every one of our numbers are in order, and then we raise capital. And that's what we did. But then, like, luckily, a lot more investor interest came through. So, it's just additional capital on top of what we raised.
Sometimes I think I need this much money in order to accomplish this. And a mentor of mine will show me that you can accomplish that and more for a lot less money than I thought it would cost. Was that your experience as well?
100%, 100%. Like I said, from day one, like, first things first, we're talking about a market that carries a lot more risk because we didn't actually have an ecosystem before. We didn't have a startup ecosystem. We didn't have a lot of tech companies coming up. We didn't know whether we're actually gonna tap into that market size. We didn't know any of that information. It was it was more arbitrary than science, and that's why every single day, like from day one, our mentors were like, you should always try and do more with less. That's why, I think we try to stick to our basics.
Yeah. So in addition to that, what were some other hard lessons you had to learn as you founded Loop?
I mean, this might sound a little funny, but get a good night's sleep because we were in trucks, and trucks never, if you're in trucking, I mean, like you're managing truck drivers, you're managing your customers, so you're kind of linking both of them, and you're constantly on the phone. Your operations are nearly 24/7, but it doesn't have to be 24/7. You gotta trust your people to do their thing, and that's where I think you gotta find a work-life balance. I'd say that's one thing. Yeah, the other thing would be probably to, like this, when COVID came, nobody expected like a pandemic to kind of slow you down. And like that's how kind of everyone uh faced reality. And like you got to be prepared for kind of handling those kind of situations better. I would say that's another thing. You got to be prepared for external shocks. Like right now, we have certain situations everywhere, like in different places where we have wars and everything that are kind of like affecting everything globally. So you got to be prepared for those shocks. So those are certain things I think we could certainly handle better, I guess.
And you mentioned you exited. What was that process like?
Like we were four co-founders, and like all four of us got together after our seed round, and we were discussing like who else was interested. And then I got a phone call, and phone call from one of our other investors who said, you know what, like I'm really interested in this. I think this can go a long way. I think you guys you're gonna do great, and you have this potential to do great. But I would like to have a bigger piece of the pie here. So would you be willing to, like, like sell your shares to me? You know, would you like to take this opportunity? I was like, yeah, give me a good valuation. And then he gave me a good valuation. I was like, yeah, I'll take it because I felt like maybe this is an opportunity I would probably never get. And so I was like, yeah, maybe this could actually further my own future portfolio of ventures if I diversify into other stuff. So our that's how that talk came up. That's how I made that exit.
I talk with acquisition entrepreneurs or search fund entrepreneurs on occasion, and they're looking to buy a company. And so it's interesting to hear from the perspective of the seller what you're looking at when you look at the buyer. You mentioned valuation. Were you also looking at the person and seeing, is this a good match for my baby that I developed?
Yes, because the person well, you look at whether they add any value to your next milestone. And the person that I'm talking about was actually one of our customers. So it just happened that, that it was a good like mix up. Like he could actually offer a lot more business from his company. He could add a ton of insights into how like customers' mindset works. So it actually kind of messed up. Otherwise, I would not be more willing to sell because I have my co-founders as well to think about. I had a board, all those things kind of came into play.
Yeah, yeah. So not just money, but a confluence of factors. Speaking of your board, how did you develop that board? Could you talk about that?
Well, it was initially when we did our pre-seed, it wasn't much of a board. It was more like four of us and our pre-seed investor. We just raised out of a safe note. If you know what safe notes are, yeah. So we raised out of safe notes, and we had our first board structure when we raised our seed funding. So we raised our seed funding from a VC, a New York VC that typically invests into Bangladesh. And basically they came on board and then it was just four co-founders and then VC. So that just kind of, that was our earliest, I would say, board structure. That's how we came up after we raised our seed round.
Okay. Yeah, I think Y Combinator also uses a safe note. Are you able to talk about the equity structure of your company? Like how much did you maintain after the seed round personally?
Well, after the seed, I would say I had over 60%, 60% of whatever I had. And that's how I think my equity. That's how everyone diluted their equity. Yeah, 60%.
And that was that recommended by your mentor as developing that equity framework or equity structure?
It was a conscious decision from everyone because we did a lot of research on this because we wanted not to get too diluted, even if investors wanted to be on board. Like we would not be taking extra investments if it meant that we would be losing control. So it wasn't just our mentors; it was a lot of research. We took into account that maybe this is a good amount to keep after your seed, and that's how we went. Yeah, but of course, I mean, you do have your mentors; they do give feed your information.
Yeah, it's helpful to hear that because there's so many different ways you can go about that. I heard too, you can maintain control even if you aren't, like you can develop the raise in a way that you could potentially give away more equity, but still maintain control to an extent. But it sounds like you had it thought out in a way that worked for you, which is, it's good to have some context there.
Yeah, that's right.
I had a question about your education, going back just a little bit further, only because it interested me that there isn't a gap between your bachelor's and your master's. Is that like the way that the program is designed, or was that a conscious decision on your part?
So there's a lot of people who have like that gap because they straight away get into their uh, get into get into work. But I wanted to like kind of finish it straight up so that like once I do kind of start, then I'm kind of free from all that hassle.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, the learning never stops. So you as long as you're learning, and I think however you're doing it is probably fine. And you also worked for a company based in Kuala Lumpur. Were you also, was that local or remote?
No, so that was actually that was actually the company which I was talking about, like the RNG export. So it was our counterpart in Malaysia. So we had an office here. We had another office in Malaysia. So that's how. But the one that employed me was in Malaysia. So that's how I actually kind of ended up working for them. But uh, the structure, how the structure worked was like uh, Bangladesh was exporting to Malaysia, and I was looking at both ends.
So you have a lot of perspective living in Singapore for a time, living in Malaysia for a time, and obviously living in Bangladesh for a time. How does that kind of shape the way that you're looking at regional, if not global, entrepreneurship?
I'd say the demographic kind of works in our favor because a lot of the youth are turning to entrepreneurship. Um, like even if not in a big scale, but micro entrepreneurs, most of them classify as small timers, SMEs. Even some are venturing into startups. A lot more startups in Southeast Asia now. We have unicorns now. We have a unicorn in Bangladesh, a fintech company called Bcash, if you heard of it. So, like, I would say that uh, the the whole region as a whole has a lot more potential than it did 10 years back. Malaysia, not so much Malaysia, but more Indonesia, Singapore. I would say they're like at least 10 years ahead in terms of the whole ecosystem. I think Bangladesh is getting there. It would, if you're an early stage investor here, then it's actually a good time to invest, because if you're riding through this period, then you're coming towards that time where balance is gonna peak. So that's how we are right now, I would say.
So you went from trucking and now you're in beauty. That seems like quite a transition. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, it's actually funny because I mean, when I started, I never imagined myself to be helping out salons book their clients, and eventually I did start a company in that, and it was actually because of my co-founder, who's actually a friend of mine. She uh, used to work in a beauty retail company that uh, faced similar issues uh, with their customers. And well, I mean, she and I had a chat, she was like, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we could start this thing together. Like maybe make some minimal investments, maybe grow this thing together and see where it goes." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe it's time to make a change, because we've tried to digitize one sector and it kind of worked because there was no digitization there, no automation there." And this is a completely brand new sector where, again, tech education uh, is not the best. Like it's not at its peak. Oh, it's actually another one of those industries where it's kind of ripe for disruption, if you will. So I was like, yeah, maybe this could actually kind of be you know, the next loop, if you will, or even more. So yeah, that's when I actually came up with Adora. We started a company during COVID, unfortunately, and that was a period where we had to sit down. But afterwards, we started selling beauty products. We retailed them from brands from the US, the UK, and we sold them in Bangladesh, made some decent capital, used that capital to build a platform for salon book. So that's how we came up to our current um, product, if you will.
And how much has Loop, your experience with Loop Freight, informed the way that you go about being co-founder and CEO of Adora? Are there some things you're doing differently? Is it easier? Is it totally different? Could you talk about that?
I'd say that it's actually different. It's actually a mixture of different and slightly easier, because you're not dealing with truck drivers and you're not dealing with customers late into the night. That's actually not a problem we ever have in salon booking, because past 6 o'clock, all salons are kind of closed and no more bookings, so customers don't really get that opportunity. So we don't really have any work after evening. So I'd say it's a little bit easier, but it's a lot different, because you're not in an industry where people are actually know know this kind of product exists. You're kind of having to teach them. We're really early stage. It's all about creating awareness right now. I'd say when we started Loop, that was a problem that was existing amongst everybody, from truck drivers to customers. So when we got in, it kind of clicked right away. But when we started Adora, we kind of have to make people aware that this is an easier way to get your salon appointments done. You don't have to wait in queues anymore when you get to a salon. You can leave your reviews on our website. You can search your salon services by location, so you can find the one nearest to you. All these kind of recommendations, all these kind of services that we're providing, we're kind of having to make people aware. So that's a little bit different from what we did it.
Okay. Seems like you enjoy and identify with the role of being an entrepreneur and a founder. Is it how much of your enjoyment is derived from the industry versus the role? Would you be just as happy in any industry?
Yeah, I would classify myself as a builder or more of an early stage builder. I think it just happens to be that I'm a founder and CEO. But if I was classified as a builder, I would, just as be happy. I think I like to build things. I like to lay the foundations for industries where, coming from a generation where, like all we ever knew was software and all we ever knew was tech. Uh, I mean, if I'm helping out in any way, laying the foundation for a tech company, I think I would be happy to call myself a builder. It doesn't really have to be a founder or a CEO.
You mentioned digitizing and exploiting opportunity for growth. What are some areas that you're looking to take? Like, where are you looking to take Adora in the next, say, 1 to 2 years?
We're looking to scale up to 15 to 20,000 salons throughout Bangladesh. Our target is to make sure customers can book their salon appointments on the same day, which is actually a problem right now because customers are not being able to book on the same. There's always that waiting period where you have to wait 24 hours or 48 hours to get your salon. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make bookings in real time. Uh, we're trying to make sure that customers are rewarded with loyalty points. We're trying to make sure that uh, within the next 12 months, we'll be able to offer customers uh, uh, like a a proper payment wallet so that like everyone, whatever they pay to us. Like we don't have the problem of dispersing the payments to the salons. They just pay us our cut, and the salons take their cut directly. And that's a process that we are working on for the next 12 months. So it's all about the fintech. It's all about the small details. I think that's how we want to operate for the next 12 months. We want to make sure that we find a product market fit.
And what would you like the youth of Bangladesh to know about entrepreneurship, having been there and done that to a large extent?
I'd say, I'd say you don't have to be a startup. Nobody has to run a startup. You can do just as well if you run an SME. To start a company with 5 customers and try and do that well for 12 months. Try and see how your customers react. Can you retain them? Can you grow from there? Can you get word of mouth referrals from them? Can you um, do you understand how to deal with the operations of it? Every single thing, it doesn't come easy. You have to kind of put in the work, and not everyone has to like do a startup because 99% of startups they tend to fail. So you can just be fine doing running an SME. You can just be a small timer and still do well. I would say that's how the youth or the entrepreneurs of Bangladesh should be looking at it.
What's your biggest regret in entrepreneurship or in your career so far?
I'd say the hiring, the firing. There were plenty of occasions where people who who were kind of close to me, I had to let them go, and it kind of takes a toll on your relationship. So uh, it's always those people that matter to you. If you kind of like, throw them to the curb, and that's what you know, you know, that's the kind of regret you feel. So I would say that's my biggest regret.
Have you evolved in that capacity now to where it becomes a little bit easier to have those conversations around hiring and firing?
A lot, because I mean, like previously when I used to like onboard new people into our team, the conversation was always like it was always positive. it wasn't really constructive. So you didn't really have that tough conversation with your employees. But like afterwards, you kind of have to sit them down. You have to let them know that, you know what, someday maybe we're still gonna be friends, but maybe we're not gonna be working together, and that's the reality of it. You guys should know this from day one. And yeah, that's something that I'm dealing with a lot better.
Yeah, it's an ongoing journey for me as well. I try to use the analogy that we're all in a jungle. It's a very competitive environment. There's many variables. And it's like what you just said, like we can be friends and I can like you, but we may not be the best team in the jungle right now. And ultimately, we each need to survive first and foremost. So, try to have those conversations well in advance so there is time for course correction if possible. But it's up to, I think, you as the business owner to make those calls. I'm paying too much for this service, or I need to cut costs here and just maintain the survivability of the company. And basically, your responsibility is to the majority. I mentioned I think I had a background in tourism. That was the hardest lesson for me, was knowing when to leave someone behind, because you had, 13 out of 14 satisfied customers is better than 0 satisfied customers. So yeah, that's tough lessons.
Definitely, definitely. And it's actually, you kind of evolve as a person, but startups, I think if you run a startup, you actually have to force yourself to evolve faster because I mean, you're running a train here, like it's not going like 10 miles an hour, it's going 100 miles an hour. So you're either on the train with us, or you're not on the train. And that's how you kind of have to like make people understand. And it's not always easy.
Yeah, I like that analogy, and that's exactly how I feel with. I also use the terminology of hiding. You can't hide as an entrepreneur. You can hide pieces of yourself in a large organization. You just stick to your job description. There's very clear measurements for your performance, this and that. But again, going back to the jungle analogy, you can't hide. You're without shielding, you're without weapons, and you have to just figure out how to survive, network, adapt, learn, like notice your blind spots very quickly. Nature is merciless. It'll show you right away, you've got this tendency, that tendency. And so, but I love it for personal growth. It's, I'd recommend it to anyone who's willing to look in the mirror, and see what's their potential is.
Absolutely.
What's one of your biggest successes? Like what are you most proud of in your career so far?
I'm not entirely sure if it's my biggest, but it's the one that's coming to my mind right now. We didn't win. Bangladesh offers national awards for upcoming startups. Uh, so when I was at Loop Crate, we didn't actually win it. We came first runners up. I think, second place is still better than none. I think I would probably say, that's one of my like best, proudest achievements, I guess. I think we got national recognition at some point, and then people kind of started to realize, oh, there's a company called Loop Free. These are founders. They kind of took this company to Singapore. They survived, and they're kind of running the show here in logistics. So, I mean, I think that those kind of recognition, even though it doesn't matter for a race, but it does matter for your personal, accomplishment, I guess. I think that's a proud moment, I would say.
Absolutely. And congratulations. That is a proud moment. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to highlight?
I guess teamwork is pretty important because if you're running a company with other founders, there's bound to be difficult conversations. And the most important conversation is going to be your vision. Like if you're not sharing a vision with your founders, then that's it. You're never going to see light at the tunnel. It's always those kind of conversations that determine whether you're going to be a team. I guess teamwork is that topic we didn't really touch on.
It could be a whole podcast on that alone, but yeah, excellent observation on your part, no doubt. Yeah, teamwork is vital. I think even the solopreneur, there's a lot of buzz around being a solopreneur, but I would argue you're not truly a solopreneur. You might be doing a lot of things, like not sharing an office with someone, but you rely on others in ways that you might not be aware as well.
100%. And even if you're yeah, exactly. I mean, even if you're a solopreneur, you're not entirely dependent of everything. You have to be dependent on other people, whether you onboard them on your team or whether you work like as a like independently, doesn't really matter. You have to kind of make sure that, people are aligned with your vision.
It was really interesting talking with you. I'd love to catch up again. Maybe we could do a part two on teamwork or other discoveries along the path. But where can people follow you? Where would you like them to look right now?
I'm available on LinkedIn. So I'm most active on Twitter right now because that's where all the action's at. If I like, if I'm being honest. So uh, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, I'm available in all of them. Mostly on Twitter right now. So that's where people can find me.
We'll put them in the show notes. Thanks for talking to us today. Best of luck.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Abe.